Welcome back, guys. I'm actually recording this video in two parts. So I've recorded the part that's going to be second earlier this week. So I think there's another welcome intro thing there. But I'm not going to edit that out because I can't be bothered. So you're just going to have to deal with that. What I'm going to start with today, the team's event we were playing in has finished. So I want to just do sort of a quick overview of how my team went. And yeah, just sort of discuss that first, and then later on I'll get into some list analysis and like what I'm thinking of changing in my list, basically. So starting off, I'm just going to go through the rounds, basically, and highlight my team and what we did. The first round we got a big win. I think I have mentioned all the vague results in most of my videos, but we got a 96-4 win, which is cap, so it's goes to 65-35. But basically we had 5 huge games. We had a really confident matrix, turned that into really good looking pairings. And then I think in the games, we had the rub of the green. We got some luck where we needed it because, two 20s, two 19s, and an 18 don't happen just because you get some good pairings. It's also, it came out on the table and everything was working well for us that round. I think that some of their guys would feel a bit hard done by some of the things that happen in the games. I know, for instance, in our Demons player against their Warriors player, there was a probably pretty important moment where a Chosen Lord and a Chariot could have gotten a flank charge into a block of Myrmidons on a 6 overrun, I think. It failed on the 5. And maybe if he'd gotten in there, I don't remember the game totally well, but I feel like if he'd gotten in there, he was in a much more dangerous position because he ended up getting flank charged and comboed by a whole bunch of things and just sort of slowly ground down. But that game could have been very different. I feel like most games with a big score often have a couple of things like that could swing it back wildly the other way. But we got that all working out well in our first round, and it turned into some really good results. In round 2, because we did so well in round 1 at the top of the table against, I think these guys are like the ETC Argentina team. I don't know if it's all of them, but I think some of them have that sort of experience. And we got a win, 57-43. Pretty much the real important games from this were our Sylvan Elf player and our Dread Elf player. So Sylvan Elves playing Vampire Covenants and Dread Elves playing Saurians. We had both of those games down as yellows, so vaguely drawish or swingy, unreliable. But getting the 2 big wins out there meant basically that we were in a pretty good spot to win, because we had, I think this was a bad matchup for our Vampire player into their Dread Elves. And their Dread Elf player did really well the whole tournament. In a good matchup, it's very hard to win over a good player. I had pressure on because I had, I think, our only green of that round. But as you would have seen if you watched my video, managed to get the win over Empire, so I was happy with that. I don't like having the pressure of being we've paired for me and I have to convert that. But it worked out. And then, that was sort of the difference because the other 2 games went down, but we got those 2 big wins in the matches that could have been even. So if one of them had actually been sort of 10-10, I think, we would have lost. If the 20-0 had been 10-10, we would have lost the round. Or if the 17-3 had been 10-10, we would have drawn the round. So those were the really the clutch plays from our Sylvan Elf and our Dread Elf player. Round 3, we played against England. I don't know if all of these guys have ETC experience, but I know they're sort of all in and around the ETC group. I'm pretty sure England have both their team and the Lions team, which is sort of the practice squad of the English ETC team. So even if these guys haven't all played for England at the ETC, I think they're in and about that group, basically. We were looking really good. We lost the round 51-49 in the end. But after 4 games, we were looking real good because we were up 49-31. Big probably games there would have been our Dread Elf player in a really bad matchup against High Elves managing to still get 7 because I think he won objective, but like lost pretty heavily on points. And our Demon player playing their Dread Elf player getting an 18 too. Hugo would be the first to tell you that he got really lucky in that game, but I didn't see it, so in my opinion, he just played excellently and outplayed his opponent, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Of course, as you all know if you've seen my video, round didn't end that well with my game against Infernal Dwarves. So that was, I guess, the other important match from the round, given that I needed 1 to draw the round or 2 to win it, but couldn't get it done. But yeah, overall, I think my team did really well prior to me, and unfortunately, I let it down. Round 4, we were up against a Ukrainian team. I don't know if these guys are like all ETC or what the vibe is, but they were doing well because we were doing well, so we were both fairly up there. And strong players from everything I heard. A lot of these guys I don't play against or see all that regularly. I've got a vague knowledge of some of the good English players just because of listening to Slander at Radio podcasts, but most of these guys I'm sort of relying on sort of hearsay and other people in my team or just sort of around mentioning like, oh, this guy's really good. I've seen him play at ETC or I've seen him get really good results at other tournaments. But so these guys I'm pretty sure are fairly strong, but I don't know them like personally or anything. This round, I reckon, like the sort of crucial matchups were probably really our Sylvan Elf player getting a big win over Empire. I think that one, I think we had it down as a yellow, but our Sylvan Elf player played really well and sort of managed his way through some bad luck, actually. I watched most of the game and he was doing a really good job managing poor dice turns, and I think the dice sort of turned around for him at the end. So because he'd kept himself in a really good position, weathering the storm, he was able to turn it around close to the end, which was really, really exciting to see. And then our superstar, Bogey, I think that was the last game of the round, so I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was the last game of the round, so we would have been up 45 to 35. Oh no, because we won 71 to 29. So we would have been up 51 to 29 at the time, but he brought us through to the cap with a huge win over Vermin Swarm, which was looking like a really tough matchup against a strong opponent, so that was really impressive. Round 5, which is the one that we've just done and finished the tournament, we ended up drawing 50 all. It was looking pretty bad for us when we went into the final game. Like, the scores were close because it was 43 to them to 37 for us. But 1 or 2 turns into the game, last game, which was Dread Elves against Vermin Swarm, it was looking like a big win to the Vermin Swarm. But then turn 4 or turn 5, I think the Vermin Demon popped in the Vermin Swarm army, and everything just fell apart. Like, the Vermin Swarm player had 2 units holding the objective for Spoils of War, and one of them lost in combat and broke and dropped it, and another unit panicked and dropped the objective. So this guy went from being sort of like safe 14-ish if he'd just kept his Vermin Demon away from the action, to ending up going down 13-7, which was a huge turnaround for us because it meant that we got the draw in the end, which was really cool. I know that their captain, who I played, Ivan, was giving a lot of shit to their player, going like, you didn't need to do that, you didn't need to go for the 20. But it was lucky for us, it worked out pretty well because it ended up getting us to that draw. We had some pretty good individual performances overall. So if I go to the individual leaderboard, we've actually got 3 guys in the top 15. So Bogey with his Vampire Covenants was 10th. McRae was 11th, but he's actually tied with Bogey for 10th because they're both on 71. And then we've got Ryan, our Dread Elf player, who was in 14. I think I'm down sort of like 30th, and Hugo's probably a bit above mid-range because he ended up on like 54 points or 53 points. But it's pretty good because we've obviously got the 3 really solid scorers up in the top 15, but then we've also got Hugo and I, while we weren't quite as high scoring, we were both above an average of 10 for every game. So, like, by far the best performance that I've ever been in for one of these teams. And then overall on the leaderboard, it's not entirely done yet, but basically at the sort of top end that we're fighting for, nothing's going to change with the last matches that are going through. But we managed to get second. There we are. The boys. Which, as I said, I've mentioned in the previous video, I think, we've never even been close to this. I haven't had most of these guys on my team before. Like, I think I've had Hugo in one and Bogey in one. But we've never even been within Kui of it. So, to get 1 in the top 50%, but 2 to get second overall, very, very happy with it. So, that was real nice, actually. And it was kind of funny with sort of like my emotional investment in the tournament, because usually it's sort of like by round 4, round 5, and I've lost 2 games, massive. I've got 1 small win. Round 4, I probably lose again, and I go like, this is like, I don't really want to play round 5. But with this one, I was not only wanting to play my games the whole way through, but I was wanting to watch all my teammates and sort of follow them like it's an esport. Like, it was a whole lot of fun. So winning really cures everything, I guess. Other than that, I don't know if I wanted to think about... I don't think so. This was just our matrix, which means very little to anyone else, basically. Those are our totals as a team. Yeah, I reckon that's basically it. We do have the weighted team leaderboard, which, we're at the top at. So, I'm not saying that it's the more important leaderboard, but if you guys want to think that, I won't say you're wrong. Yeah, so I guess overall, very successful event and heaps of fun. Happy to do it again with these guys and hopefully go for the win next time. I will now somehow figure out a transition to the second part of this video. Welcome back, guys. I'm looking to do today basically just a review of my list from the tournament. I've seen Alex do a similar thing on his channel. If you don't follow, I think it's Alex Schmid. I think that's just it on YouTube. I think that's his channel. He does some really good videos, sort of letting you know his thoughts on like list developments and Warriors of the Dark Gods focus. But I think there's some Orcs and Goblins stuff from before when he was playing them. But just like some good insight basically into his thoughts and how he's sort of iterating his lists and how they fit into the meta and what changes he makes there. And I'm sort of looking to do something a bit similar with my list now that the tournament's done. What I'm going to start off with basically is I'm just going to go through every game and I'm going to give all of my units a score from 1 to 5. Just basically saying 5, they were like everything I could have asked for. 1, if they were completely useless. And just see if there's any kind of clear weak links that we might want to look at. I've already got some ideas, and probably you do too if you've watched my videos, but going through it and sort of actually thinking it through and getting sort of numbers down might be a better way for me to know or like see things that I might not really be thinking about because they're not sticking out of my mind, I guess. So first game when I played Demon Legions, it was with like the Sentinel in Lemuel block, the big Bloatflies, big Clawed Fiends, and then the Maw. In that game, the Beast Lord was he was very important because like he was the reason basically why we were able to take off the Sentinel block. He was resistant to the range damage that was coming out, so I reckon he basically did everything I could ask him for. And it was really like he was important to how I played it because he was able to be the reason I was zoning that right objective. So I'm going to give him a 5. Oh, if it'll go in. There we go. The Shamanism, bro. I don't think it was that useful because I don't even know if I cast shamanism spells when I was focusing on the Gore-Tex on the right. Um, and he died to magic, which, like, admittedly was kind of unlucky with the Strength 5 breath weapon and the 7 Strength 7 hits from Hand of Heaven. But even if he didn't die, I don't really see that he could have contributed much more to that matchup, to be honest. Because he got unlucky, and I think he would have been safe points if I didn't. I won't give him a 1, but I don't think he was all that useful. Like, if I had spent 600 points elsewhere, it probably would have been more valuable in that matchup, I think. Druidism guy was really important for keeping my Gortak alive on the right, which got his Maw, which was huge in the matchup. Helped the Beast Lord, kept the Beast Lord alive in the combat. So I reckon he was also pretty crucial. I'm going to say without him, game goes very differently. Wildhorns, I mean, they did nothing special, but they took the objective, which was everything I wanted from them, and the reason why I had them in the list. So I'm giving them a 5 as well. Obviously, these scores will vary on, like, the first game. I got I think a 19. So, like, obviously the scores in that one I'm going to be pretty happy with a lot of stuff. We'll probably see in the ID game I'm less happy with most things. The Ambush Wildhorns didn't really do much. One of them came on and just didn't die. The other one came on and killed some Furies, then ran off. And I don't really... Yeah, it wasn't really their game, I don't think. Maybe... We really got kind of nothing from... They did kill Chaff. Alright, they did something, so I'll give them a 2. Gargoyles... Oh, they chaffed the Lemure block, which let me do my sneaky tricks with the Gore-Tex. I mean, Chaff's Chaff, but they were good enough. They did what I needed them to, and did nothing special. The Dogs... They didn't really do much. They sort of gave me an extra combat res for the charge on, like, turn 5 or 6 to help pop that Sentinel block, but other than that, really didn't do much. Didn't lose their points. They're probably just roughly average. Gore-Tex, they got a bit unlucky, but that's something I sort of got to keep in mind with Gore-Tex as like one of their weaknesses. If they get unlucky, they can just die. But they got the Maw, which is pretty huge, and they could have done a lot more. So I reckon because they did just die and sort of exchange points, I'll give them a 4, but I think they were pretty important, so they were helpful there. Giants were huge. Neither giant died in the end, which was them getting lucky, but they zoned out things on the left-hand side. They made my opponent play differently, I think. And the giant in the flank of the Sentinel block was... I probably wouldn't have broken it, even through all the rounds of combat, if I didn't have him in the flank. And probably couldn't have gone in with my characters if I didn't have that support coming, because... eventually my characters probably whiff around and run away, I reckon. So I reckon they were crucial. Pretty good scores all around. Pretty much Shamanism guy's the only... Shamanism guy and Ambush Wildhorns were the weak links there. The Empire game... Beast Lord did Beast Lord things. He didn't really do too much. Like, he was important, I guess, because he was the one who was going to fight the Griffin if the Griffin fought the Chariot block, and he would be the reason why I could get through the tank if I charged it. But it wasn't amazing. Like, he didn't do anything particularly special, so I'll just give him a 4. Shamanism guy was pretty important because of all the effect that he had on the ranged damage. Giving off Chilling Howl to protect the chariots is pretty important. Totem Beast to force my opponent to sort of turtle up even more. I reckon the game's very different if I don't have all those spells to throw in. I guess I should probably acknowledge the fact that he's got Dark Rain, but it's not that important, I don't think, because I could just switch equipment on the other wizards. So if I'm going to keep one wizard or the other, it doesn't really matter which one of them has Dark Rain. The Chariot block as a whole was pretty important, because it was sort of the thing that he couldn't fight, and I think it got most of my points. I'll give him a 5 because he was part of the chariot block and he did the ranged effect thing, basically. Druidism guy, similar to the Beast, like, I mean, he helped out in combat, but it wasn't all that important. He kept my Gortak from giving up wounds. And I think he actually finished off the cannon in the end. I think that's pretty fair to give them 4, but the Shamanism guy was a bit more expensive, a bit more important to the matchup, so him getting a 5. The Wildhorns, they just did what they needed to do. They kept themselves alive in the corner, which was one of the reasons why I could make sure I won objective. And even though they're like, if they were just like a block of 15, he probably quite possibly could have gotten them with the Griffin late on, but he decided not to charge them because he was there was a decent chance he would have just lost his general. So I think they were actually pretty good in that matchup, to be honest, which kind of surprises me that I'm giving those such high scores. Because I do include them pretty much just for scoring, and secure target isn't necessarily their best objective, but they did well in it in the first game. Second game, banners is a pretty good objective for them because I can just leave them behind. They're not important. The ambush guys, well, they just kept their points, but also threatened his shooting. I reckon they were great because in the end they just helped me with objective, but still affected his deployment. Gargoyles did nothing. I didn't need chaff. They didn't do anything wrong, I guess. So, like, it was hard. I mean, having chaff's important, but they didn't do anything. So I'll just give them a 2, but not a 1 because they didn't stuff anything up and they weren't a liability in the matchup. The dogs actually were handy because their Vanguard move got them to get the Gortax in position. And they're just chaff, so I reckon they did everything they needed. Gortax in that matchup were really good, actually. They died, which happened, but on like turn 2, they basically guaranteed that I'd win the objective. And I can't hold it against them too much that they died. But I won't give them a 5, I'll just give them a 4. Because, I mean, in the end, I think in terms of points, they maybe didn't even get their points back. They did draw a lot of fire, but the fire wouldn't have done much damage to the chariots anyway, I don't think, so it doesn't matter that much. One giant was kind of useless, but they did affect his deployment with the fact they could Vanguard and him having a sort of bookend with good armor save units. They killed the one that was sort of mucking about in his lines, killed his wizard and drew a lot of attention, which is sort of one of the reasons why I like they're in the list to begin with, because if I Vanguard them up and get them in a tough spot, they'll take a lot of the opponent's focus for my chariots and my Gortax to get into position is sort of the idea. Because one of them was kind of pointless in the matchup, I can't give them a 5, but I will give them a 4 just because one of them was really good. ID. I'm tempted to give the Beast Lord a 0 just because I would have failed the charge if he didn't give the +1. That would have been better for me because it was such a dumb charge. I think the Beast Lord was a bit of a liability because he couldn't fight the Incarnates very well. He was kind of the only reason why I was able to threaten beating them, but I don't reckon he did very well. And the fact that he's not fearless is actually pretty. You know what? I reckon it was not good. I reckon he was pretty useless in that matchup. Shamanism guy, he's actually kind of countered by the flaming rerolls. His magic is not that effective at killing the war machines because you're basically relying on totem beast because the bees doesn't do as much when they've got plate armor. I mean, if you can sneak a win through, it's good, but you're not going to kill it with bees, I don't think. So, and there's those times where you're just going to get off like a couple of wounds and then he's going to save them both and you're going to have wasted a fairly important spell. I think he's roughly average because, I mean, he does have a reduced effect on stopping their ranged sort of damage, but he's worse in combat, and his ranged mitigation isn't actually as significant there. Druidism guy, he's a bit the same. I reckon he wasn't that valuable to the matchup because the ID rerolls to wound, and the fact that they're flaming sort of counters Druidism. Yeah, I mean, being able to get wounds back on things is handy, but it didn't help me in the matchup. You know what? No, you're a 1 there too. The Wild Horns did nothing. Couldn't get the objective. Couldn't stand there. Couldn't take the range damage, and going towards the center. Like, my hope was sort of with center objective that my chariots could move to a position where they're pushing things back because things are scared of them, and the Wild Horns are just sort of creeping up behind. But that plan didn't work out, and I'm not sure the plan would work because the chariots are narrow, and there's just so many things that can sort of come around and still threaten or take the objective when the Wild Horns are there. So I don't think they did. I don't think they were able to do what I wanted in that objective. The Ambush Bros, I mean, they're bad for the objective in this one. They didn't do a great job because he was able to protect his War Machine Park pretty well. I don't reckon they were great. Gargoyles, oh, they didn't really do anything, but it wasn't their fault because the game was over in one round. I'll give them an average because they're chaff and they didn't get a chance to chaff. The Hounds did what I wanted them to. They got into the position that I wanted them to be. It's just that the rest of my play wasn't good enough. So I'm not going to hold that against them. I think they did everything they could for really cheap. Gore-Tax, they didn't get a chance. I think it's a pretty decent matchup for them if I can get them in a good position. This is a hard game to evaluate because so much stuff would have probably been more effective with better play. They're probably about average because they didn't do all that well in that matchup, but they were asked to do too much. And in fact, the fact that I had like vague chances to stay in the game was only because I had Gore-Tax. So I can't run them too low there. It's a bad matchup for the Giants because there was a lot that they would struggle to fight. I don't think they were very effective for their. So it looks like, I mean, that was a bad game obviously, but ID was a problem for this list. DE was, I mean, as I said in the video, played differently. I think that he wins that 9 games out of 10 once he knows my chariots are as scary as they are. The chariots were all really good. The Beast Lord died, but it was like really unlucky, so I won't hold that against him. Shamanism was really important because of Savage Fury. Druidism was important to make sure things were alive with the top. I'm just going to give them all 5s because they were pretty huge in that matchup. Wild Horns, what did they do? Nothing. They weren't able to creep. They couldn't fight. I didn't support them very well. But the fact that they couldn't fight anything on the board was pretty bad for them. Nah, just 1. They did crap. Can't give them anything. Ambush Wild Horns, what did they do? Oh, they would have. If they come on, it would have been better. Ended up sort of just losing points, but I'm not going to mark them too badly because I was really pretty unlucky that they didn't come on there. It's not like a Gore-Tax where you're like, you know what, 2 games out of 5, I expect the opponent to roll good on wounds and the Gore-Tax to just die. Those guys, I don't know, it's like a 1 in 27 or 1 in 81 chance or something they didn't come on in time to win the objective. Gargoyles, they did what they needed to. They were safe from all the shooting. They got the chaff when I needed them to. They were fine. Hounds just died. Took a spell, but the spell wasn't really in range of anything else. I'm not going to mark them down when, they're so cheap, and if they take an ice and fire, they're always going to die. Gore-Tax sort of zoned some things, but couldn't really fight a lot of the things in his army. I don't reckon they were good there. Giants. Oh, I think both of them got unlucky, but not so unlucky that I can just completely forgive it. Realistically, at the end, they both just lost their points for nothing. They were fine positionally in terms of like forcing my opponent to react to them being so far up his lines and stuff, but they didn't do well, so I don't reckon it was great for them. Maybe I should do an average on here too. I will do an average. Okay, there we go. Average done for them. Demons, Beast Lord. Oh, Beast Lord was huge. Beast Lord was great. Shamanism guy was important. His spells were good. Savage Fury was huge in so many ways. He was great because he couldn't be killed. Druidism guy, pretty much the same, I reckon. He was probably a little bit less important than the other two. Although having stone skin up to make the bloatflies a lot less effective. No, I reckon he was just as huge as the other guys. The Wildhorn didn't do much, but they didn't lose their points. They didn't take the objective, but with better play, they might have had a possibility to. I think that's not... it wasn't terrible, and I think if I did better and played smarter, I might have actually given them a chance. So I don't want to run them down based on that. The ambush guys, they kind of, they stuffed up in the positioning, but that was, my fault. I say they stuffed up when I put them there. Can't be the model's fault. I think they basically did what I needed. One of them was what drew me the objective, and the other guys with a better charge ordering, maybe a bit of better luck, would have been in a position to be quite dangerous. And actually, they held on to the bloatflies for longer than they should have. I reckon they did pretty much what I asked them to, and it was just a bit of bad luck that cost them. The gargoyles, they chaffed when I needed them to. They stayed alive otherwise. Probably just a 4 there because I don't know, I'm really variable on what I'm rating my chaff. They weren't so important, I guess. So I'll go 4 rather than 5 because they weren't crucial to the matchup. The hounds, I pretty much just wasted them, but I didn't have much to do with them, and I didn't see the siren charge, so I won't put them too far down, but I don't think they were very... no, I don't think they were helpful to the matchup. They were more just in the way. And actually, I was frightened about them getting charged by one of the long-range charge things. So I don't really think they were able to chaff when the threshing engines were on the board. So I probably actually would have preferred not to have the hounds in the list there. Gortax, well, I didn't use them well. They can't be credited for killing the Eidolons because that was my shaman that did that. I think they're not great in the matchup because they're vulnerable to the range damage. Like if I hadn't killed the Eidolons with the Savage Fury, I don't think they would have done amazing. And the flies are a problem for them when they got the rerolls to wound. All the magic that demons have basically is either going to hurt them at range or make them a lot more vulnerable in combat. I don't reckon it's good for them, but they still do have the potential to sort of turn it, so I'm going to just go 2 rather than 1. The Giants actually kind of did... the plan sort of just didn't work out, but I liked what the options they were able to give me. They didn't do that. They were kind of just weren't good enough, but they did give me more options and make his life a lot more difficult in the top flank. So I'll go with a sort of average just because they didn't get it done. So it looks like I'm pretty happy with the Chariot unit. I was actually thinking that maybe I didn't need the Shamanism guy, but I feel like he's in some matchups, like He was important in EOS. He was the most important of my chariot guys against ID. And against DE and DL. The fact that he's so hard to wound was actually really, really helpful to that unit. Whereas if I had, say, a Druidism guy, but I gave him a ward save and like a bit better protection or whatever to have him in the front line, he wouldn't be as good at doing that as the Shaman. So, yeah, I think my suspicions that the Shamanism guy is actually quite important are kind of confirmed by that. Because even against DL, maybe if the game had gone a bit differently, and the chariot unit was fighting something more dangerous, he probably actually would have been quite helpful. The worst things are the Gore-Tax and the Wild Haunts. It surprises me because I was actually really happy with the Gore-Tax. I guess they didn't really do that much, but I fear that if I took the Gore-Tax out, they wouldn't really be able to, like, I'm not sure that I can replicate the pressure they put on with anything else. And I think that if I played them better against DL, and if I put them in better opportunities against the ID, they'd be scoring higher. So I'm not ready to get them out of the list yet. I think them and the Giants are actually quite important to how the list plays. Overall, like if I was taking the Gore-Tax out, I'd probably have to do something completely different. I probably wouldn't even have the Chariot unit. I think that taking any of the Giants or any of the monsters out and doing anything other than replacing them with other monsters, I think would be a big change that probably isn't worth it. I have considered going triple Cyclops rather than Gore-Tax. Maybe I'll think about that when we get to the next stage of this. And I think that the Ambush Wild Horns didn't need to be as big as they were, because everything they could have done, they probably would do if they were just the 15-man unit, which would give me more points to potentially make the other Wild Horns useful, but I don't know how that would go, because I don't know how to make those guys useful. King of the Hill, they would have been less useful than the Ambush Wild Horns anyway. They're not good at center. They're not that bad at breakthrough. They just weren't in a good position with breakthrough. And they're not that bad at secure target, I guess. Yeah, they're probably not as bad as I thought. I mean, 3's nothing particularly special, and there's something I could definitely look at to jut out of the list, but I think they're probably better than I was giving them credit for when I was thinking back on my list previously. I had up, I think I've still got it up. Let's bring this over. So this is, I think, the idea that I was working on. I can do this better. Okay, there we go. So basically the changes were that it probably makes more sense if I look at the matchups I'm looking at first, but I'll just go through them here anyway because I've got it up. Beast Lord, I have gone away from the Death Cheater and given him a 5-up ward save instead. And rather than a flaming weapon, he's got Blessed Inscriptions instead, because I found that ward saves were a bit of a problem. And specifically, I didn't like the fact that when I saw Warriors lists, I didn't want to fight them usually because I think all the ones that our team played against had a Herald. And he's not good against a Herald, but he should be better now that he's got Blessed Inscriptions. And obviously he's worse defensively, but I think I can sort of mitigate that with Druidism if I get the buffs up and don't get caught out being charged when I'm completely unbuffed. And he's got a Flaming Ward now, which means that he can't benefit from a 4-up regen or a 5-up regen, even if I put it on because something I was facing had Divine. But I think that might be a little bit helpful against the Portent Lord, who is also a problem that I was looking at in Warriors lists. And anything, so Alchemy or specifically ID, that relies on flaming, it's a little bit of a then very difficult to deal with piece, because like in my chariot unit, if I go in and they get rerolls to wound off, it's bad for my shamanism guy, but then it's good for my beast lord because he's getting awards, 3 up awards there against all those attacks. So sort of 6 of one, half a dozen the other. Otherwise, I've lost Seed of the Dark Forest because it's sort of like a 1 or 2 turn benefit to me usually, because I'm trying to charge through with my chariots. So I don't know it's that helpful in the nature of the list. Obviously, +1 to cast is always handy, but because I had to sort of rejig things basically. Put Dark Rain on my Druidism guy instead of Seed, and then because I didn't want to lose Crown of Horns, I put that on the Shamanism Soothsayer, which means that I didn't have enough artifact things, and I was like, in terms of Seed of the Dark Forest compared to MR2, Crown of Horns, or Dark Rain, I think it's the least important of those magic items. And I'm pretty sure there was no combination. Like, I've got Potion of Strength, so I do have an extra slot, but I'm pretty sure there's no combination that I could get all of those things to, like, Dark Rain on one, Seed of the Dark Forest on the other. I think the one with Dark Rain is always going to be lacking in... No, because Wild Form Ancestral Carvings, it's 160. Ancestral Carvings, Obsidian Rock... 135. Yeah, no, because the Soothsayer has got 110 points of gear before artifacts, and Crown of Horns is 25, and so is Obsidian Rock. Even the 70 from Seed of the Dark Forest takes it too high for me to get that. Few changes in core. I've dropped the Wild Haunts down, as I said. I've actually put the Feral Hounds into core. And then I didn't want to go to gangbusters investing in those Wild Haunts when they weren't that good. But I figured I'd try them with Blooded Horn, Totem, and paired weapons, because I don't have that many offense boosting spells. So Blooded Horn sort of helps them more, because the only other one that would help them otherwise is +1 strength, because Savage Fury isn't that important on them. But I do have plenty of defensive boosting spells if that's what I need from them. Obviously makes them a little bit worse at the sort of unicorn moment where they're in the right position, get the charge off, use their parry and distracting and maybe a stone skin to just break something because they don't take any damage. But I think that works much better if you're running like a Beast Lord in them who can do a bit of damage, or the double Legion standard Destiny's Call Great Weapon BSB for a static 7 with a little bit of output block. But with my list makeup, I would have to get that BSB, I would have to drop one of my wizards to a wizard adept, and I don't think it's worth it, because I think Stone Skin is crucial, and Totem Beast is crucial for the Shamanism guy against gun lines. So yeah, that's what I'm trying. I'm trying it out. I could put those Feral Hound points into the Wild Horns, and if they're good, and then put the Feral Hounds back out into Chaff in special, like with the unit of 5. They were pretty decent. Like, I've given them a 3.4. I think they were actually more valuable than I thought coming out of it. So I might change that because I've still got them. I don't know. That'll be something I'd look at, because I might just revert to that, because I actually think, looking back on the tournament as a whole, as I just did, they're probably better than I gave them credit for. And I've included a Briar Beast, because they're usually a thing that I just sort of like, they're the easiest points to go, because they're only 100 points, and they're not crucial to how it plays. But I've found when I do include one Briar Beast, it's actually, like, it really affects the opponent's deployment. So one, they might choose the entire different side to what they would want, because there's a forest in their terrain, in their deployment zone, otherwise that's going to be really annoying. But he's just like, it's just a cheap way to really sort of affect your opponent mentally. It's not going to work in all matchups, so if we went back to these ones, I don't know where, was there a forest down there against DOS? I don't think so. There was one sort of center of the board. Maybe, it maybe would have been annoying. But it definitely meant that if I forced him to take the top, it would have been super annoying. The Demons player wouldn't have cared. Infernal Dwarves, there was not that relevant to Forest. Probably wouldn't have been that great against them. Anyway, really, because... And again, Totem Beast into Vassals, it's quite possible that he's there for quite a while. Against the DE, there was sort of only the Forest in the middle on my side. I should also note I played on 4 out of 5 matchups on the B maps, so my experience with this list is probably a little bit funky in terms of my view of how it works in the map pack, given that those are sort of the less balanced side of it. Against Demons, I mean, I guess in all these it probably wouldn't be that helpful. So EOS is sort of the only matchup that it could be really annoying. I have had tournaments before where the Briar Beast was really important to how the game went down, or to how deployment happened more specifically. So I'm wanting to try it, I reckon, but yeah, I might, if I like the Wildhorn setup and I'm able to use them a bit better, I might just go back and put the Feral Hound points into the Wildhorns and switch the Briar Beast out with 5 Feral Hounds again outside of core. I've got sort of a list here of things basically where this is what generally with my style of lists, which are typically quite aggressive, I find that I struggle with against each army. And I'm sort of thinking I might look through it and go through how my list changes are probably better against it. I think realistically I'm slightly worse against Beast Herds because they probably take Druidism if they're taking Great Weapon Minotaurs. And I now don't have a Flaming guy, but I don't want to face that anyway. My Chariots don't want to fight Great Weapon Minotaurs. And Beast Herds are really uncommon. So I don't know that it's that important that I'm slightly worse against them. There's not much I can do about the Demon Legion's magic, I don't think, aside from switching out one of my wizards to a BSB with either icon or double either icon. But I don't think that's where the magic is most important anyway. The magic is mostly the fact that it deletes all my monsters. So rather than... Aside from changing my list entirely, I don't think magic is going to be super affected no matter what I do. But I think with Blessed Inscriptions on my Beast Lord and still keeping Eye of Dominance, I'm much better against Greater Demons. I'm much better against the Scourge, I think, which was always something that I was like, it's probably quite dicey. Either way there. So I reckon that's actually better. And I've played DL twice, and I think generally they're an army that I might be quite likely to see, because they're common. And, I mean, I'm not avoiding pairing myself into them. So, yeah, I think that's an improvement. Let's go. Oh, that's a gross colour. Light green. It's not light enough. Alright, whatever. All of D is bad, and I'm going to try and avoid it no matter what. Shooting is them... Like, I've put shooting here as the main issue, but, like, all of Dread Elves is the problem, really. It's just that I feel like when they've got shooting, it's the sort of thing where then I'm going to take enough wounds getting to combat that I can't fight them once I get there. The big Wildhorn units are probably valuable for that, but they can't deal with Black Colics, which is the biggest problem. I can't think of much, unless I was like going 80 bow shots from Mongrels in core. I don't think there's much that's going to change that. I'm going to try to avoid them anyway, so I don't reckon it's all that important. Let me just give these guys a yellow as well. Because I don't think that the changes to my list have changed that, and I don't expect to play them very often anyway. Or when I do, it's hard to avoid it being a bad matchup no matter what I do. So I don't think that's an important distinction between the two lists. Dwarven Holds. To be honest, I'm not that worried about them anyway. I've kept the Shamanism guy. I don't reckon that most of my changes I mean, the Briar Beast is probably more helpful than anything else against dwarves. Um, the characters are still just as good. Yeah, because they can't get divine attacks. So the Beast Lord is actually probably better, slightly. Um, the Wildhorns probably are also more like better because they need that. Like they're never going to break Dwarven holds. So even if I get into some pillow fight where we both just got ranks and are slapping each other, I would need an offensive buff to do anything valuable in there. So it's probably slightly better. Cannons are just as dealt with. Seeker characters realistically just as easily dealt with in this new list. So I don't reckon there's a significant change, but I don't think they're a problem anyway. EOS, pretty much the same, but they tend to have ward saves on their characters, I think. Did my first opponent have ward save? I don't know, I'm going to have a look. I just realised that my first opponent didn't have Light of the Sun Stole at all, which isn't as important. I guess he can give divine attacks to a prelate and stuff. I might be slightly worse, but I don't think it's all that important. So it's probably not significantly worse. Light of the Sonosol is sort of a problem that I might want to deal with. Let me think about that for later. I don't think it's much worse, but maybe I can do something to make that better. Yeah. Again, I don't want to play high elves any more than I want to play dark elves. Spear Prince usually has a ward save, but he's got the spell on the Master of Canary Tower Guide. He usually put regen on anyway, so probably not much of a difference between my Divine Great Weapon and my Flaming one. Flaming's not that important a synergy for them usually. The shooting is just the same. I don't think anything's changed there. ID, I didn't know that Incarnates were a problem, but after my round 3, I'm like, no, Incarnates are now a problem. I need to be able to deal with them. And I think I'm better at it with the current setup because I've got Divine Attacks and I've got a Flaming Ward. So I reckon that's a positive step. No, we're using different colours, whatever. KOE have got a new book coming, so who knows? They weren't even in this tournament. I don't need to think about it. Ogres, Hunters. I don't think this book is much of a problem in general. Typically the lists I see, I'm fairly happy to play, because they're like if they're shooty, they're generally a mix of like fighty and shooty, and I think I can deal with the shooty aspect, and probably still outfight them. And realistically, the only problem that I generally have is Hunters getting around into my backlines, because I don't really have much that can hem them in. And a Gorsak would fight one and probably be fine. I don't, depending on the kit out, but I don't think there's many Hunter kits that would want to fight a Gortak. The Giants probably don't because they usually have decent armor saves. And I wouldn't be stubborn. I think... Or Steadfast, where a Gortak would want. Gortak's stubborn and Steadfast doesn't actually matter. I don't think that it's significant. Again, I'm happy playing them. I haven't helped the only issue I have, but I don't think it's significant anyway. Orcs and Goblins. Mykonox is basically the big problem, because I think if he doesn't have Mykonox on something, I can generally fight everything with the chariot characters, and I don't know if it's better dealt with now. I'm still sort of just as vulnerable to that. I'm not more vulnerable. I think that's basically just the same. This is basically looking like my list changes don't do much, except for against the problems that I found in this specific tournament, which I guess is to be expected, but yeah. When I was going up here, Demons I was pretty happy against. EOS I was happy against. I wasn't with ID. Okay, so I mean, ID improvements are important. Okay. SA, I generally find that the biggest problem is the damage that Coatl can put out. I don't think this has changed much either, realistically. Like, I've still got everything that I can to sort of mitigate any kind of range damage, which is basically just shamanism and like ambushes and stuff. I suppose that having a Briar Beast around who can annoy like the small skink units and stuff is probably a slight help. Yeah, particularly if he's running the kind of Quaddle who's not in Temple Guard but is like darting between 3 skink blocks or whatever. It's actually probably quite handy. I reckon with the Briar Beast specifically, I'm a little bit better in this matchup against what I struggle with. That's going to annoy me. Let's just do that. Okay. SE, Sentinels and Elk Lord. Well, they love Forest, and I reckon the Briar Beast is actually helpful against some of their like soft units, generally the shooting units. If he was getting, like say, 2 ranks, 8 attacks would hit me like 7 times. It's quite possible he'd just kill the Briar Beast, but if he doesn't, it's also quite possible the Briar Beast with fear and stuff makes him run away. It's probably slightly better. I like all elves, I kind of try to avoid them anyway. And I haven't dealt with the main problems of Sentinels and Elk Lords. Because I just find that like it's actually not Elk Lords, it's more Wild Hunter Lords. Because they can fight. Or maybe my Shaman could just cop them actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, maybe it's actually not as big of a problem, but I don't think that I'm significantly better against them. But I don't think that I'm worse, so there seems to be just general improvements, I think, from the looks of how everything's going. UD, I find that Div is the biggest problem, but I don't have any way to stop that from being a problem. I'm not sure, they're flammable sometimes, but I got rerolls to wound anyway on the new weapon. I don't think anything's really changed here either. I haven't helped any against horrors. I'm actually worse against horrors. Worse against tooled up counts because I've got a worse save. But they can't completely mitigate it by being in like a flaming unit. I think I'm worse against VC because I've got a worse save on my Beast Lord and... Oh, that's really aggressive. Let's simmer that one down a little bit. Okay. Yeah. I reckon I'm a bit worse there, just because like my chariots are already very vulnerable to those things, and they're not better now, I don't think. VS, I don't really know how the book works, to be honest. I always just looked at it and went, you got really hard to break blocks, and you're probably going to surround me at some point and break me on combat res. I don't think much has changed. The Wild Horns are probably a little bit handy there, and the Briar Beast is probably a little bit handy there. I think I've got slight improvements against VS. Not massive, but it's okay. And that'll change, I guess, as the book changes and gets out of alpha. But the biggest changes, I think, were the fact that we were coming up against Warriors players, and I felt like that's exactly the kind of matchup I should be like, yes, like I've got all the I'm a good fighting army. Get me against this other fighting army and I will outplay them and I'll do well. But I found that with Herald and Portent Lords, they were basically keeping me from being able to do that. So now I've got a Flaming Ward for the Portent. Now I've got Divine Attacks for the Herald. I think that I'm much better. Hellfire is still going to be as much of a problem as ever. I'd have to delete the Gore-Tax for it not to be a problem. Because the Giants aren't as valuable as the Gore-Tax. If I took triple Cyclops in this list, it would probably be a little bit better in terms of Hellfire and also the fact that they often have a Flying Lord or a Herald or whatever. But then the Herald would just take a hard target and the Cyclops would never hit. I think regardless, I think we're much better. I don't think there's much that I can do against Hellfire. So yeah, I think overall it would look like my changes help against some of the things that I came up against and struggled with. And while I'm worse against VC, I'd try to avoid, if they had like a super tooled up dragon, Brotherhood of the Dragon. Yeah, like any of those guys that were just like super fighty, I'd probably try and avoid it. Same as if they had double horror, I'd probably just try and avoid it. But overall, I played against demons. I'm still kind of happy to play against ID, so I'm happy that I've sort of helped myself against some of the problems that I was likely to encounter. Particularly if people start using incarnates, because they seem really good. I think I've helped myself against VS, which is important because I wasn't confident going... Like, I didn't have to play any of them, but I wasn't confident about those matchups if I did. And I've helped myself against Warriors, which means that now I think this is a better list, at least for teams, and probably a better list overall based on just the look. I think that I've improved against the things that I struggle with. It'll just depend on now if I fight things and realize, there's new things that I'm struggling with my changes, but they weren't that significant, so it's probably not that bad. Yeah. So I guess that's all that. I hope you found this interesting, and in some way informative or helpful for your own thought processes. I was mainly just sort of thinking out loud this whole time. So, yeah, let me know if you've I've discussed a lot, obviously, and as I said, I was just thinking out loud. So, if you think that I've overlooked something important in the changes I've made or missed some clever changes, particularly with the core setup that I'm still not sold on, I'm still not all that happy with, although I think is less of a problem based on how these guys looked. Yeah, let me know, because I am interested to hear what people think. I think on my last video I mentioned list changes, and Sean commented saying that he felt like my core was pretty useless, and I was like, yeah, I agree, my core didn't do very much, but I think it was a little bit deceptive in that my core was not fighty, but sometimes played a role. So, yeah, I guess in terms of the core specifically, my changes would make it worse only against the EOS. And would make it better against the demons. I think it would have made it better against the demons because weight of attacks then, with a little buff, might have meant they could actually fight like a threshing engine or one of the small units of flyers or something. But yeah, if you've got anything that you think I've missed out on, let me know. I'll be very interested.